Hi boys and girls, it's Mrs. J. Thanks for joining me again. I hope you've had a great day today. It's actually nighttime at my house right now. Everybody got all their work done. Connor and Kenzie got all their homework done. Mr. J got his work done. So they're actually upstairs right now playing a video game. They're playing Fortnite, but I gave them all the warnings that they'd better be quiet. No hooping, no hollering, no stomping, no victory royales, no woohoo. Until we're finished with our math lesson, because they said we're having school in the basement. So, but even though I am in the basement, you maybe see me looking around a little bit because I'm still waiting to see if Ellie, one of these days, she's going to get over that gate and she's going to come over here. I can hear her on the steps. So every once in a while, I'll look over there to see how she's doing. She peeks at me over the edge. This is where Mr. J keeps all of his Marvel things. He used to know someone who worked at a movie theater. So I have a few friends down here in the basement with me that will be enjoying our math lesson with us. I thought maybe I would just let you know who they are to let you know that I'm not really talking to myself in my basement, because that would just be crazy. Although when I was little, I used to play teacher and I did it all the time. So I don't know, it's just a few years later maybe that I'm doing it again, teaching school in my basement. So anyway, let's see if I can't find my flip button. So okay, so we're gonna walk around the basement. My first friend, oh, there's Thor. He's in the corner. And if I come over this way, Iron Man is down here in the basement with us. And if I come back the other way, Captain America, best student ever, so well behaved. And then in the corner, we have Hulk. He's actually being very quiet today, so I hope he's going to be good during our fraction lesson, because it's really important that he is. So anyway, so that's a little tour of my basement. Not the whole basement, but some of it. So anyway, you may see the word fractions up here on my chart paper, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about fractions, because I know we started fractions a little bit after February break when we came back to school, and we got into rulers a little bit, and we did some things with fractions, but fractions is one of the really big units in third grade that you need to know a lot about. After multiplication and division and adding and subtracting with larger numbers, fractions is the next most important subject probably in math that you need to learn. And I really want to make sure before you go off to fourth grade that you have a good solid understanding of fractions. And so we're going to do some lessons along the way. I don't know, I'm hoping we get to go back to school and we'll get to be able to do this in person, but if not, we'll just keep doing these lessons along the way. So to refresh your memory, this is not as nice as my smartboard, I can tell you that. I need you to remember that fractions always talk about equal parts. You always have to have fractions when you talk about equal parts, because you have to compare shapes and pieces that are the same size. So if you look at the two shapes I have here, and we did some activities about this. Remember that day that we cut out all of the little colored rectangles? There was a blue one and a red one and a yellow one and a green one, and we made shapes with the rectangles, and then we cut them into triangles. This is the same kind of thing, and we talked about the difference between equal pieces and unequal pieces. So you can't have some that are too big and you can't have some that are too small. So whenever we talk about fractions, we're always talking about equal pieces, and we're talking about shapes that are the same size. Especially when we start talking about fractions and we're comparing fractions, we always want to make sure, remember we talked about pizzas being the same size and cakes being the same size, or a cookie or a candy bar being the same size. I don't know why we always talk about food, but we do. So the fractions have to be equal, and our shapes have to compare and be of the same size. So the next thing with fractions that I want to remind you, oops, wait, the paper's stuck, is that there's two numbers in a fraction. There's a top number and there's a bottom number. And I'm going to give you about 10 seconds of think time to see if you can remember the two names of the two parts of the fractions. may or may not have been 10 seconds. I don't know. I'll give you one more little hint. The top number starts with an N, the top name of the number, and the bottom one starts with a D. And we had a specific clue that helped us to remember what that bottom number was with the letter D. So let's see if you remember what they are. So the two numbers in a fraction have two specific names. The top number is called the numerator, and the bottom number is called the denominator. And that D was the letter that helped us to remember that the denominator was the number that was down, or it was down on the bottom. So the D is the denominator, that's the number that's down. Now those two specific numbers in a fraction tell us really important information. The numerator tells us how many equal pieces we're talking about, and that's usually how many hops we take in a number line, how many bars we color in our fraction bar, how many pieces are colored in a shape. So it's the number of pieces that we're talking about. If it's a word problem, it might be how many pieces of cake we ate, or how many pieces of bubble gum we chewed. It might be how many toys you grab out of the bin, out of the total amount. The denominator, I think, is almost the number that's more important. The denominator tells you how many pieces are in the shape altogether. So how many pieces are there in the whole that have been cut into equal pieces. So if you have a denominator of 4, there's 4 equal pieces in your shape. If you have a denominator of 6, there's 6 pieces in your shape. If there's a denominator of 8, you have 8 pieces. If it's 10, you have 10 pieces. But those are always equal pieces. And remember, the tricky thing about denominators is that the bigger the denominator gets, the smaller the pieces in the shape have to be. So if you take something and you cut it into 4 pieces, you know, those pieces might be, you know, pretty good size. If you have to cut that same shape into 16 pieces, those pieces are going to get really, really tiny because you have to have more of them. So remember, the bigger the denominator, the smaller the pieces. So it's opposite. That's really tricky sometimes, and you have to really think about that in your brain. So fractions must always have equal parts. There's 2 numbers in a basic fraction, the numerator and the denominator. The numerator tells us how many equal pieces we're talking about, and the denominator, I hope I said numerator, the denominator tells us how many pieces in all are in the shape. Now, there's different ways that we can represent fractions, and hopefully these look familiar to you. I have to hop up and get a marker. Hang on. Sorry about that. I don't have a little helper down here. I should have had those handy. So this is a fraction bar, and you can see my denominator is 3, so I have 3 equal pieces, and this is my number line. Now remember, the thing about a number line is that you always want to count the spaces. You don't want to count the points, and that's why I drew the lines of the number line to be like the lines, sort of like a fraction bar. Because if I was to color in this shape, I have to put my glasses on, sorry. If I was to color this in, sorry, I don't have fast motion. I can't speed this up for you. I would want to fill in that whole space. And remember, when we color fractions, we want it to be neat and even and equal and colored in. When we would do our fraction on the number line, remember, we would want to fill in the same amount of space. So if I were to count 2/3 on my number line, I would have to go to here, and I would have to go to here. So I would have this space on my number line that would be 2/3. So that right now is coloring in and marking the spots that 2/3 takes up in my fraction bar and in my number line. Now, one thing that we did talk about is we talked about a unit fraction. And if you remember, a unit fraction is a special fraction that always has 1 as the numerator because it's talking about one piece out of the whole. So this fraction bar is filled in with 2/3. But if I were to label the unit fractions, I would put 1/3 here and I would put 1/3 there. Because then when I add them together, that's what gives me the 2/3. If I were going to label my number line, this would also be 1/3 of my number line, and this would be 1/3 of my number line. But remember, a number line, just like a regular number line, wants to count up. Remember, we take the hops and we count, like if we were counting on a regular number line, we would count 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, you could go to 10 or 20 or 100. If I'm counting my fractions on a number line, remember, I always want to start at 0. I hope you can see that. You always want to start at 0, and then my first point would be 1/3. I would have 2/3, and then I would have 3/3 to finish my number line. So I would have those numbers count up. But if I was also to label my unit fractions, this would be 1/3 and this would be 1/3. So you can see that my equal spots here in my fraction bar equal the same spots on my number line. So number lines can get a little confusing because there's two different sets of numbers. You can either see the unit fractions that would mark off each section of the number line, or you can see how my number line would count up. And the tricky thing, you might remember this about a number line, when you draw a number line, you always have to have an extra line out at the end because you always have to start with 0. So my denominator is 3, but if you look at my number line, 1, 2, 3, 4, I actually had to draw 4 lines. I remember that took a little bit of practice for us to get used to a few weeks ago, because I remember some friends would see 3 and just draw 3 lines, or see 6 as the denominator and draw 6 lines for the number line, and then realize you either didn't have a 0 or you didn't have enough room at the end for the last fraction. So you have to remember, when you do a number line, that's one little tricky thing, you have to add an extra line either at the beginning or the end so that you can have 0 at the starting point, and you know you're finished when the numerator, oh my goodness, the numerator and the denominator are the same number on the top and bottom. That's how you know you have a whole. So after that little review, I think I'm going to have to tip the phone a little bit farther down so that you can see the fractions at the bottom. I hope you can see those. I'm going to hold the phone just in case. I have the fractions 3/4, 5/6, 1/8, and 2/5. And what I want you to do on a separate piece of paper is I want you to, for each of these fractions, I want you to draw and color in and label a fraction bar. And I want you to draw out a number line for 3/4, 5/6, 1/8, and 2/5 on a separate paper. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the video, kind of like we do at school, where you do your work and I do my work, and then we come back together and we compare answers to see how you've done. So I'm going to make a separate video. I'm going to do the answers, and then you do your work and I'll do my work, and then we'll compare and see how you did. Okay, so I'll see you in a few minutes. Good luck.